Welcome back to Chris and Retro. Tonight we're doing another signature moment. We've had to take a couple weeks off based on logistics, but tonight joining me via phone will be Sammy Says again. Um, Technologically, based on where she's at, this is really the most reasonable way to handle it and be able to handle the show. So we hope this is works well for you. Tonight we're going to go over step four. Previously we've talked about steps 1 through 3, and wherein we've met the crossroads. We realized we needed a higher power. For us, we found him to be God, and step 3 told us turn it over. And now we're in step 4, which really starts some tough work. We've been working through these worksheets the last few weeks, and one of the things we're going to go through those worksheets again, just in terms of the questions and guiding our discussion. But that really starts out this week. I thought was pretty impactful for step 4. The first comments, it says, that this whole section is designed to help us take stock of who we are. Addiction has taken such a toll over our lives. We'll focus on the deficiency that got us there, but we also have to recognize there's some positive as well. Two important parts to assess in our lives fairly are the twin dangers: self-aggrandizement and self-righteousness at one extreme, or guilt and self-loathing at the other. So we're going to talk about that because there's a balance in this. I think a lot of times we look at inventory and we look at only one side of it. So with that, we're going to talk about our thoughts, work through the guides, and see if that helps. I thought that this is kind of interesting. I heard a quote tonight from Jordan Peterson. He said, I got to read it to you. Esteemable people do esteemable things. I thought that was a great quote from his book that he wrote. And I think that step 4 is definitely at the heart of a lot of the work that we would have to do. And, to get ourselves in some esteem, we certainly have to do esteemable things. And I think this definitely is. So without any further ado, we'll jump right into it here. Welcome to the show, Sam.
Hey, Christopher.
Christopher, I'm gonna put the banner up here that I do every time, and I think the audience thought my full name was Chris and Retro. You just blew it, and now they know my name's Christopher. Just kidding. So that step 4 is made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. And before we get into that, Sam and I obviously currently sleeping in different locations, but Sam is around the girls a lot. And Sam, after you left today, Skylar, that's our 8-year-old. She was on YouTube tonight and came rushing in the office. She had to show me this video she's watching. And just for the audience to know, Skylar finds the most bizarre YouTube videos that you'll probably ever see in your life. And she was cracking up on the living room and had to show me this video. So I'm not sure, it was funny, but I'm not sure what it says about me as a role model for her, Sam. So you might want to pull me aside and coach me. But she came in and there was a little kid in a tricycle riding this tricycle around the living room, and somebody had left the basement door open. This kid just disappeared down the stairs. And there was a reaction to it. And she was laughing so stinking hard at this. But of course, there's all these disclaimers. The mom said he's fine. I'm not sure that kid was fine, but just to let you know, that's what your daughter's watching tonight. So for anybody watching,
that was funny.
She was dying laughing, like literally dying laughing. There was nothing I could do to get her to not show me this video. So, and then later on, this same YouTuber apparently was doing a reaction that showed some little kid. He was sitting there. They were videotaping this, so I don't think it was staged. He looked really upset, but he had one of those folding aluminum chairs, and he was mad because his brother kept eating the brownies all the time that his mom made. And so they show the brother just walking through in complete ignorance, blissful ignorance, walking through the door, and this kid smokes him in the head with this aluminum chair. It was just insane. And she's laughing at that too. So we've got some work there, and I laugh, so I'm probably part of the work that needs to be done. She's going to have to do a searching and fearless moral inventory. But anyways, it was hilarious after you left. So that's, so anybody watching the show, if you take our advice, recognize that we have children that are not necessarily following that advice, and probably more of a product of our own behavior. But I wanted to get into this, and I think it's, as we continue through the steps and we continue to work on this and have a conversation with you, Sam and I are clearly obviously in the throes of doing 12-step work and that type of thing. And it really is a matter of a lifestyle for people for us to have the life that we want. And, talking about this notion of that we've made a fearless and moral inventory of ourselves. So we're now at that point. Now it's speaking as if it's past tense, but the work has become, once you've completed step 4, then you're making this statement. So Sam, what are your initial thoughts, I guess, about step 4, and what does it mean to you?
Let's see, what does it mean to me? I think there's a lot of, I mean, for me personally, there's a lot that in my past that I just had chosen not to think about, or I pushed out of my mind to the point where I really did forget about it. And taking a stock of things, I think it's really good to go back through, even though it's painful, to find patterns that, you know, in your life that led you down the roads you don't want to go down, to make amends with you know, the people you've made mistakes with, and just kind of wipes the whole slate clean, and you can really start to be your own person again.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with that. I mean, as we work with step 4, we obviously you get to a point where you're making amends and you're dealing with your resentments and things along those lines. I think that in the absence of doing this inventory, um, I think that unknowingly we're fraudulent to ourselves. You know, I've always maintained that the greatest lies I've told anybody in my life, I've told myself. And that's certainly true through my recovery and, you know, active use is these lies that I tell myself. And in recovery, there's some more dangerous lies because I can tell myself everything's going just fine. Um, you know, as we go through the step 4 and some of the questions we're going to do to prompt some thinking here and to encourage you again to do the work of the steps. Don't just make a bumper sticker out of it and don't know all the sayings and everything else and really do not do the work. It's kind of pointless. You might as well do something else. But you know, there are twin dangers as they stated at the beginning of this. You know, self-aggrandizement and self-righteous, and then is one extreme, and then the guilt and self-loathing. I think that a lot of times when we look at step 4, we really only look at the things that we're doing wrong. You know, so there's two sides of this. There's the negative and there's the positive. There's things that are, you know, things that we need to fix. There's also things that we do well. So that's also a piece of it. It's not just how it manifests itself in these characteristics I described, but our view of how we do this inventory has to be based on the totality of the field of play. What are other things that are detracting from it, and what are the things that can actually help promote success in our recovery? You know, it starts out, I think, with really just the gut of this whole thing for me. That and the workbook that we're actually been using as a reference guide for this whole thing. Um, but has anybody hurt you deeply by judging or outing your addictive behavior? And do you feel anger for that person? So as you can see by this first guided question, we're really getting down to the GER in us. You know, these hidden dangers, these hidden feelings. You know, so for you, Sam, I mean, do you feel like there's people that have hurt you deeply by judging you or outing your addiction?
Yeah, I think um, some with my, you know, a family member, and a lot what to do was stigma that I found in the hospitals, and you know, just from looking at my chart and figuring out who I am, you know, by that.
That's a good point.
I have a lot of anger towards that, towards people who, you know, figure out who I am, or if I do make a mistake, that now that's all I am, instead of looking at what else I am, and, you know, maybe what else happened that day.
That's actually a really great point. I would have not even thought about this. And so for the audience to understand, Sam and I don't do a lot of prep on this stuff, so it really is authentic. But I hadn't really thought about that. But I mean, we've fussed about the medical field and the stigma part of it. I always focus on stigma with that, but I didn't really think about it. They really are outing you. You know, people that don't
Yeah.
understand. Like a practitioner might be just coming up to you and saying, "Hey, why's your leg hurt?" And the chart outs you. That's interesting. And you've obviously felt anger for that. And it's funny that the word outing, because you've actually used that word outing with one individual that bothered you about this whole thing. Um, I'd say for me, um, I outed myself with headlines in the paper. You know, it was kind of hard not to out. So then I decided to do the whole Eminem and 8 Mile thing. You know, I do live in a trailer park. I do live with my mom. You know, I outed myself just so nobody could come up and say, "I know this about you." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, so doesn't everybody else." You know, that gave me a little bit of peace so I could do the work
Yeah.
by outing myself. However, in a reoccurrence, I was outed in a very painful way. And you and I have talked gratefully about that, and I am angry about it. Now,
Yeah.
was it correct? And if I had been behaving correctly, would I have ever been outed? No. But, you know, it still falls in lines with some of the things that, you know, we vacillate with different moral compasses, you know, the no cop collar thing. You know,
Yeah.
it can be that thought process doesn't always go away either. And perhaps that's one of the things that we look at step four can be one of those characterizations that there might be some morality behind it, but it could actually be a deficiency in my character. However, I can say that for me, I definitely have had anger from being outed. Um, when it's definitely not on my terms. It's not to say that I wouldn't, because I typically am somebody that discloses that stuff, but it's got to be on my terms for me to feel comfortable, so I can actually do something to fix it. It's not that I'm trying to be shady always. Sometimes I am, but not always. A lot of times it's just a matter of I want to be able to figure out how to fix it, and I haven't figured that out yet.
Right.
But your medical chart one I think is interesting. There's probably a lot of people that'll listen to this and go, "Oh yeah, that's right. I have the same circumstance."
Yeah.
As you look at character traits, that you associate with your addiction. Um, and I think that you and I have slightly different situation, not only so much as what our substance of choice is, but not only that, but also how we got here, what caused it in the first place. But at the same time, there are certain elements and traits that, with your addiction, based on the longevity of it and the vast majority of your life that's been associated with it, are probably different than what mine is. But when you look at your character traits that you associate with addiction, are they purely negative, or have you also used them for beneficial purposes? So, are there traits about your addiction that we typically would say are negative that also have that positive flip side?
Yeah, I'd say they're mostly negative, but I think things like creativity and like I've been pushed so far, but I still had um, the energy to survive it all. I think I've been
Mm.
a tougher person on the other side of it. Things like that I think can be useful um, in my current life, like creativity and those types of things. And but what about you? I feel like you had something good to say about that.
Well, I've got a point to make on it, but I tell you, one thing I can say is you're remarkably resilient. Probably out of I don't know of anybody actually that is as resilient as you are. But to your point, that resiliency was really just to keep fighting another day so you could use another day in your active use. However, when you get to a place that you're not on the other side, like now is a perfect example. Yeah, your recovery is extraordinary. I've only can know a handful of people that, in the face of what you're facing, still um, have been so serious about your work, and I think that is notable for sure and remarkable for me. There's a lot of times I think what we do too, and you and I both being addicts in the same house, we can easily take each other's inventory, and I've done that too even recently, where I'll point out some situation and make it the totality of your work when it actually isn't, just because it makes me afraid to see that behavior still there. It's you're not going to be perfect. There's going to be things that you're going to work through. Um,
Yeah,
but to this point, I think that um, your resiliency is absolutely a positive, but it also has been the thing that allows you to stay in active use as long as it does. Because some people stop because they run out of money, or run out of you know health or whatever. You always seem to be able to find a way to survive and move beyond it. So, this I think the point you were getting at with me, and the comment I would make is my father, when I was raised, always had a little bit of a hot head as a kid, and I didn't really care for a lot of people. Actually, I can't think of anybody I cared for all the time. They always find some way to push me, and my dad was trying to coach me beyond that type of behavior as a child, and he told me that the thing that you can't stand the most about somebody, you'll probably find is an extraordinary quality about them on the other side. So the point of this whole thing is that there are positive and negatives regardless of your circumstance. So if we're in active use, I think we generally look at people as all negative, and I think we even look at ourselves in our early recovery as thinking we assess it only as, okay, what are all the bad things I'm doing? What are all the things I'm doing wrong that make me go do all these stupid things? When in actuality, we got to look at, okay, what are the traits of me as a human that give me tendency to do these types of things? And also, what is the positive inventory of who I am and the strengths I have that can get me beyond it and sustain a life that doesn't need it? If we ignore
right.
the positive piece, we're probably ignoring pretty significant tools in our work box that can help us get better.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important actually because those are personalities and things that we've developed in the hardest times of our life, so they're really etched into our personality and who we are.
for sure. So one thing, and this will be a very personal piece as people go through the questions that you're asking yourself, and again, and when I say work in this whole thing, it really is an inventory is truly counting the cost, counting your attributes, counting the tools that you have to use. It's the total picture. I know I have a tendency with inventory to look at, okay, my inventory is going to be like, where are all the dumpster fires in my warehouse of, Chris Bridmore. But the actuality is that I have to look at the total landscape, the total battlefield, and what tools I have to use in the battle, and what tools are, and what are my weaknesses. What are the places where my enemy, my addiction, can come take me out? And with that, one of the questions we have to ask yourself, is if you had a chance to do over one incident in your life, what would it be and why? And the reason we ask that question is because we are tasked with understanding the exact nature of our wrong, not understanding each and every inventory of every time we've done something wrong. So our inventory is not about finding about every single time we've screwed up. By pulling out one incident that we would possibly do over, there's probably a lot of earmarks of how we always behave that we can use as a subset and a model to course correct some of the behaviors that we have. What are your thoughts about that? Because that's how I take it when they ask the question, are there any redos that you'd have in your life? For me, I look at it as if I look at everything, I'm just going to exhaust myself chasing my sins versus figuring out what I was doing consistently that I could correct.
Yeah, I kind of have trouble with that one. There's a lot of things that I would like to redo.
Yeah.
And I think when I first got into drugs, I feel like if I could go back to the 2 days I tore my ACL, I feel like that would have changed everything. But as far as the mistakes I've made, there's too many of them to even go back and look and see like what if I had done this differently or done that differently. I think I had to learn the hard way a lot because one of my negative qualities is I'm really stubborn, and that wasn't good when I was a teenager, and I think when I had Skylar, that's really when I started to grow up a lot. So I could say one of the good things is that I had Skylar, and that turned, my stubbornness around, and I learned a lot there. As far as really changing anything, there's so many things that I'd have to change that it's almost like I wouldn't really change anything. I just want the best for my daughters now, and if I still have the opportunity to give them that and to have a good life with you and all that, then all the past can be something that means something.
But it goes back to the notion of whether I can control or I can't control. I mean, you and I could go back through any number of events in our history that we would want to redo on if we could go back in time, but it's wholly impossible. The reason this question is brought up around redos is just to say, look at that point in time and start to assess what happened there. What is it about me that caused, what was my role in that situation? And do I still exhibit those behaviors? Because if I'm still exhibiting the behaviors that got me in that situation in the first place, and I'm like, man, that sucked, I probably did that. And then I start thinking, holy crap, I can think about 3 or 4 other times that exact same thing happened. And then I'm looking back and go, I behaved that way in the last week. It doesn't take active use for me to be showing all of the earmarks of problems. And so that's an area where I'm constantly challenged is just because I'm not using doesn't necessarily mean I'm okay.
Yeah, I agree.
But I would say for you too, the stubborn comment you made. First, you are, but I would agree. But I think that you come by that with heredity. I don't think I don't think there's ever been a bumper sticker or a cliche out there that said the German and the Irish are not stubborn. If they did, then that's just a big lie. They probably are running for political office somewhere. But but your stubborn will also is part of the way that you can get through grind that most people can't. That's probably why one of the elements that got you on the U.S. national team anyway is because you were able to grind past things that others wouldn't just because you said you would. That declaration, those determinations that you get, while sometimes they're a real pain in the ass to deal with when you dig in on certain things, and I'm the same way. I mean, we both are very stubborn people, but that rigor,
Yeah.
when you get your mind right and on the right things, there's no stopping you. Even look at the fact, I don't know anybody with what you've got on your plate right now that is closing the number of real estate houses you do. It's just honestly, I almost laugh when I see another close come up because you're just shockingly good, and that's something that's remarkable. And I think that's the positive side of the stubborn will, where you're just saying, just because everything's going on the way it is in my life, I'm still going to be the best there is at real estate. So that's stubborn too, and I think it's great. And again, it speaks to the whole point of this inventory anyway. It's not all negative. Being truthful with ourselves. It's stopping these lies so we understand what we're dealing with here. I'm dealing with the fact that I constantly trip over that, you know, baseboard in the house and mess up my toe. Well, I got to turn the corner differently or whatever else, you know.
Yeah.
That's what the assessment is. Well, without belaboring that more, I mean, we really have to start looking at some other things here, you know. As we think about our worst traits, I thought this was an interesting question in this workbook. If you think back at your worst traits, Sam, and the ones that you have identified for yourself, do you think you were born with them, or were they shaped by your environment? I think that's a tough question because I think this is area where we don't take. It's easy for us to not own our stuff in this question.
Yeah, I think it's a gray area. Um, I think a lot of it is your environment. But I think it's both. I think, um, yeah, I don't know. What do you think? I think it's just both.
I would say it is both. I think that your environment can perpetuate a lot of things. I think some things we are born with, but what in your case, based on your own profession, you know, trauma was a big impact.
Yeah,
So the environment you lived in after these traumatic events, I think it is both. You know, you had some things that happened to you that just were not of your choosing, and but yet where you were settled into, where you know your quote unquote safe places, were also lend itself to those problems. Um,
yeah, yeah. I think there's a lot of trauma like that. I didn't really know how to handle as a child either, and so I learned how to, you know, put memories somewhere where I never retrieve them again, and it
yep.
just continued like that for years. So,
Yeah, you definitely bottle things up, and then you hide aggressively. That's why substances really work for you, because then you don't have to face that fear. It's almost like you're joining the bad guys that are trying to kill you. That's all I can think of. Like the wolves are at your door, and you're afraid of them, and you can't keep the door shut long enough, so you hide. You hide by becoming one of them. I think we all do that to some extent. You know,
yeah,
there was another question they asked, and I think it's really important about this. I'm just going to brush over this. I'm not brushing over it to minimize it, but I don't think any further discussion because it's really self-explanatory. All the way through our addiction recovery, our willingness to take ownership over what we own is incredibly important. You and I have both met a number of people in recovery that blame everybody else under the sun. In fact, the one that has called you out is a big one for blaming everybody else under the sun but himself. Um,
yeah,
and so that our willingness to own our role. Now, if you find it, I think the biggest diagnostic for yourself, if you find when you're trying to understand your recovery and doing step four work, and every single thing in step four is somebody else's fault, you probably are not really being honest with yourself.
yeah. I think that's a big one.
Yeah, so it's really the tone of honestly, just look at the scoreboard of what you're doing when you're doing your inventory. If you're finding that in your inventory, 95% of what's on there is somebody else doing it to you, then you probably want to pump the brakes and rethink what you're doing there because you're definitely not being honest with yourself with your inventory.
Right. Yeah, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Yeah.
Now, the question that this is more for the audience because Sam, you and I have talked about this in exhaustion. You know, they asked the question: have you ever experienced trauma? And Sam, you experienced an extraordinary amount of trauma. We don't have to get into on here, but you've had some highlight reel trauma with gunshot injuries, and you had some low light real trauma with some real scumbags in the world, and some other traumas based on addiction in your family and your own issues and all this other stuff. When for the audience, when you're dealing with your inventory, recognize the lens. So one of the questions was, was it born or was it shaped by your environment? Trauma is a tremendous shaper of addiction. It's also can shape your reoccurrence. If you are not rigorous about working through the steps, whatever attributes make you start making that first lean back into addiction, maybe have been caused by trauma or it is habitual, obviously, but there are certain circumstances when you start seeing those things come up more and more, well before you get to the first use, you got to flag that behavior, put a stake in it, and figure out how to deal with that. Trauma is very sneaky that way. It'll keep. We have learned to react. It's kind of like I've had a shoulder injury for quite some time now, and it's pretty painful. It's based on my history of trying to hit people in a cage that I probably shouldn't have been in the first place. And these injuries, they just build up over years. And now at my age, some of them are creeping up. I mean, the shoulder is killing me, but there's other muscles reacting to it now. So now I'm getting muscle spasms in the back of my shoulder and everything else. That is kind of how trauma works a little bit. It's the injury is there, but then it starts to cause injury to other things around it that have been reacting to help support you through that traumatic event or that traumatic thought.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I think there's why you have to be so painstaking about it is because there's like even just anniversary dates and things like that that might seem pretty self-explanatory. You really have to be wary of, I think, and know that whether like whether it's an anniversary or somewhere that you go that triggers you and you think that you're fine, that's you're really setting yourself up for failure, I think, if you don't, go above and beyond to fix those or to have some sort of support network where you're not, falling into a trap.
Yeah, you actually were the first person I'd seen this. So when we first started to get together, you were we always talked about the fall and the fall. You always had struggles in October, and we knew. So September 12th, 2016, correct?
Yep.
Yeah, September 12th, 2016. Sam was shot twice, and Skylar's father, was shot around 6 times in the head and killed in some street stuff. And she was 1 month from delivering Skylar. And Skylar obviously survived and is here in the home, actually out in the other room right now. Is supposed to be in bed, but I think she's pushing the line on that, just so you know, Sam. But but she's healthy and stubborn like her mother. And
Yep.
so she went through that traumatic event, and I initially that we knew, was very aware of the date because the date would come around, and Sam was very aware of the date. But then over time, somewhere along the line, are starting to forget the date, but yet the general behaviors are still there. We become so accustomed to that season. It's like our body almost puts in a biological clock to say, now's the time I'm going to make you feel horrible and draw you back to the life that you say you don't want.
Right.
It's not like you don't need it on the calendar to have your mind start thinking a certain way. It just knows, okay, the summer just ended. There's certain smells in the air. There's certain feelings I have, and I don't know why I'm feeling this way. Well, it may be because it was around the time of something significant.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a real thing.
So, we're getting a little long here. I want to make sure that we get through this in a meaningful way. We want to make sure that we're having a conversation with ourselves about where our good and bad decisions, what they have in common. There's our good and bad outcomes. What were the commonalities in both? There's some things there that we can really draw from our strengths and understand that we're strong in those areas. Make sure that you're calling out the appropriate owner of a certain circumstance and not always blame your stuff on somebody else. Make sure you're owning it. One of the questions they ask is, do you feel responsible for the damage you caused because of your addiction, and why? I think that all of us have some level of responsibility, at least down deep inside, that we feel. And so I think that's a big one. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Sam.
No, I think that one is all my fault. I feel like, I don't know, but I can't really change addiction. I don't know where the line would have stopped, where I would have started learning quicker.
But the way you phrase it, I think, really speaks to the purpose of step 4. And I think that was a very honest answer. I don't really know where it is what you said. And that's the whole point of step 4, is we can't just allow ourselves to not know. We got to take the time to really dig in and understand as best we possibly can. Because if we want to avoid going back, these things that we're not sure of, that we call out and recognize they were elements and significant elements of our addiction, if we truly don't want to go back, we've got to figure out what that is. And so these are areas why this becomes hard and why you need a sponsor and why you got to do the work in a way. Step 4, if you do it right, takes a long time. in my estimation.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
You know,
And you can't just blow past it because it's one of the most important. I mean, it's a lot of people like either stop or they stop at step 4, and I guess it's hard for a reason.
yeah, and it's very difficult. There's other questions that we'll ask yourself. You ever done anything you're ashamed of? Well, in active use, we all have done stuff we're ashamed of. In fact, I've not met one person that's had a significant addiction season that didn't have at least one or two things that they hearken on and say, okay, wow, that was sucked. I've got one friend that has, article in a newspaper that is very triggering, and it's amazing how that traumatic event has impacted every year after that, and many decisions after that without him even thinking about the article. But the behaviors and his reaction to that article have really caused him a lot of problems with this recovery. And he's now getting his hand, really getting a handle on it now, finally, for the first time. Sam, for you, gunshots and things like that, these are all things that, you know, they're triggering, but they're not necessarily things you're ashamed of. It's the things that you're ashamed of that whatever it is that demonstrates that or outs you, so to speak, those are the things that you struggle with. I know for me, that certainly is the case.
Yeah, I think being ashamed is, in its own right, very devastating to our recoveries, and not wanting to hide, and so you gotta use you gotta use those to drive yourself into be that much better, so you don't have to experience those moments.
The last thing I'm going to ask on this, though, is, and this is a big one, and I'm going to ask the how and why on this one, because do you judge yourself too harshly or too leniently? I think that there's a way that we judge ourselves. Sometimes we judge ourselves harshly so that other people don't judge us too. So even inside, we don't really think it's that bad. We'll take on more burden from it just so people leave us alone. I definitely have a tendency for that. Or we judge ourselves too leniently and put it on everybody else. For you, Sam, how do you feel you handle that type of thing in terms of, do you judge yourself too harshly or too leniently?
I think the addict version of me judges herself too leniently. Into like when I've made, um, you know, um, made mistakes towards addict tendencies again. Um, but when I'm really trying to fix problems, then maybe I judge myself too harshly on the other side.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah, I've seen examples of that with you, but I also think that you usually, one thing you do well is you don't really take other people's inventory unless that you're hurt. If somebody hurts
yeah,
you, then you have a tendency to do it, but you're not really a judgmental person that way. And in fact, I think you're pretty fair, candidly, in terms of how you allow people to recover around you. And you do beat yourself up quite a bit on the inside. If you're really hurt, though, as I think it's about the only time I've ever seen you really even go after anybody else that way. It almost seems like in your case, you genuinely, I think, judge yourself way too harshly.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. You do too, I think.
oh, without a doubt.
Yeah,
I think for
most
me,
definitely.
our reasons are different. A lot of times, mine can be manipulation. I'll do it so that other people don't judge me, and that they'll come over and say, "No, it's okay." For you, I think you genuinely really beat yourself up. So,
Yeah,
as we start to wrap this up here, because this was a longer conversation, and this step actually takes a lot longer to get through. Um, the work here, they summarize it by saying that this step should help look fairly and searchingly at our personalities. We have character flaws, and some of them led us down a dark path. However, these questions also assess our positive traits. True growth occurs when we understand that many of the traits that led us astray can also help us and others. And this gets back to the whole notion of, you get to keep your recovery if you give it away. That peer work, Sam and I have done some stuff with a former congressman on I am you, you are me. That's the fellow traveler idea, that we're all in this together, and that support with each other, understanding that giving back is really important for our recovery.
yeah, yeah. It's a huge. I mean, that's the last vital piece of it. I think that makes it all fit,
Right,
makes it all work.
for sure. Well, we're here to close, and Sam, I just wonder if you've got any final thoughts on step 4 as we wrap it up.
I think that the wording in the steps is perfect. I mean, I really think that they put a lot of time into writing these steps, and that they work for a reason. I think because I think the wording in all these steps is perfect. Like made us searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves is just huge. And I think each step is unique in that there's a legitimate, purpose for it that will improve your life.
I would agree, and I've not been one that really took AA as like had to have it, but I think in this recent life that recent stage of life, I really see so much value in these types of programs. And regardless of your 12 step program, it's a guidepost for you to kind of understand where you are in your process, and then you take the time to really assess what's going on, not just based on what you're feeling, but on the actuality of your behaviors and what's going on around you and how you think. For me, when I look at this step 4, as we went through this show tonight, and also some considerations as we're getting ready for this whole thing, um, the inventory has to be taking stock. We have to take stock of what's going on here. If we've got, if you're taking inventory of a warehouse, you're going to make sure how many sugars are out there, how many boxes of gloves are out there, whatever it is, you're going to understand inventory of every single thing that's in there. Same thing with our personal lives. If we don't take inventory of all the good and the inventory of all the bad, we don't understand what we have to work with.
Yeah,
we don't know
absolutely.
we don't know what needs to be thrown out, and we don't know what we need to replenish. So we have to understand what we're working on, because if we're working on something that actually is a strength of ours, it's a waste of time if we're ignoring the work that needs to be done on something else. So we have to be honest with ourselves at this stage of the game. If we don't, then step 5 isn't possible for us, because we aren't even really identifying our true selves as it is. And that's why people do the steps a couple different times. Is it's like going over that knoll. The first time you're only going to be able to understand a certain amount of things, and with experience, you'll understand more.
Yeah, I think that's really important because you can have every tool that you ever need in your arsenal, but if you don't know that it's there or it needs to be sharpened or whatever the case is to use it in a way that best helps yourself, then it's pointless and it won't ever help you.
Right. Well, guys, I really appreciate you tuning in. By the time you've gotten through step 4 and you've asked yourself these questions, you've done the work, and you've presented it to somebody else. You've made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves, and the morality takes on a lot of different tones for sure, and that's a completely different discussion for a long time. But the moral inventory is really about intent. Where's your heart in the matter? Was your intent for evil? Was it intent for good? What is your intentions when you look at your inventory, and make sure that you're honest with yourself about it. That's why it takes the work. Make sure you're honest with yourself. Don't leave anything off the page, and do it correctly. Ask yourself the questions. There's plenty of worksheets out there. This is just one that we found just as a guide point for us to work through the discussion here. But when you're actually doing the work, I would encourage you to Google 4-step worksheets and see what's out there. There's plenty of them out there, and it'll help prompt some thinking. I really do appreciate you tuning in the show. Thank you for being part of these special events. We're going to continue to do these through the 12 steps, and then we'll do a summary of it as well. And then we'll figure out what the subject matter is for signature moments going forward. We'll do another one next Sunday. But please like, subscribe, share. If you got comments you'd like to add in there, please add them. We'd love to hear from you on this. It helps us, as we start to continue to grow the work that we're doing here. But guys, thank you so much for being part of this. Between now and the next time we talk, I'm going to do every single thing I can do to stay out of trouble. I hope you do too.